On August 25, 1944, at Cherbourg Harbor in Normandy, France, Sergeant William Henderson watched in awe as a convoy of trucks lined up before him. His hands, covered in grease, momentarily lost their grip on the wrench. The British had predicted that these trucks would fail. They claimed the design was flawed, underpowered, and unsuitable for modern warfare. But now, Henderson observed 6,000 of these trucks preparing to take on the impossible task of supporting General Patton's Third Army as it advanced across 400 miles of war-torn French terrain. The trucks were emblazoned with the letters GMC, General Motors Corporation. For the 75% African-American drivers, however, those letters meant much more. They symbolized survival, the difference between victory and defeat, and the vital lifeline keeping the Allied forces moving toward Germany. Little did they know the GMC CCKW truck, dismissed just 4 years earlier as inadequate, was about to prove itself more valuable than tanks or fighter planes, becoming the backbone of the most challenging supply operation in history. The story of the GMC CCKW truck starts not on the battlefield, but in the design rooms of General Motors in 1939. The U.S. Army had requested a new 2.5-ton, 6-wheel drive truck capable of operating off-road in any weather. General Motors responded with a modified version of their existing commercial trucks, using commercial components. The first design, known as the CKWX 353, included a second rear axle for better traction and load distribution, as well as all-wheel drive for off-road performance. This early model featured a 77-horsepower engine and weighed nearly 10,000 pounds. France placed an order for 1,000 of these trucks in late 1939, and production began at Yellow Truck and Coach Manufacturing in the U.S. However, when Germany invaded France in 1940, the French army collapsed quickly, and many of the trucks were captured by the Germans. Despite being initially rejected by the British for their performance issues, some of the trucks were diverted to the Soviet Union as part of Lend-Lease agreements. In 1941, General Motors redesigned the truck, addressing many of the British concerns. The new version, the CCKW, featured an upgraded engine producing 104 horsepower, giving it more power to handle heavy loads. The chassis was also modified to allow for different missions, with 2 wheelbase options. Although not revolutionary, these improvements made the CCKW more versatile and reliable. With a focus on simplicity and mass production, the CCKW was designed for easy repair by unskilled mechanics. It was built in large numbers, with General Motors' Pontiac, Michigan plant producing 1 truck every 7 minutes. During peak production, these factories ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The CCKW was never a speedster, but its design emphasized durability, ease of repair, and the ability to be produced quickly and efficiently. Key factors that allowed it to play a crucial role in World War II's supply operations. Engines were assembled from hundreds of precision parts, while transmissions, axles, and suspension systems were built in separate facilities and shipped to the final assembly line. The operation employed tens of thousands of workers, including many women who had stepped in to replace men serving in combat. The scale of American industrial mobilization can be seen in the numbers. From 1941 to 1945, General Motors produced around 562 750 CCKW trucks across all variants. This included specialized versions, but the total for standard models was approximately 518,000 to 519,000 units. To put this in perspective, Germany produced just about 100,000 trucks of all types during the same period. The Soviet Union, despite receiving massive Lend-Lease aid, made fewer than 200,000 trucks. Even Great Britain's entire wartime truck production paled in comparison to this single American model. The CCKW almost equaled the combined truck production of all Axis powers. The CCKWs inspired dozens of specialized versions. These included dump trucks for engineering units, tankers for fuel and water, mobile workshops with lathes and welding equipment, communications vans, housing units, ambulances, wrecker trucks with cranes, and anti-aircraft platforms with quadruple 50 caliber machine guns. Each variant used the same basic chassis engine and drivetrain, which made maintenance and spare parts logistics much simpler. However, numbers alone don't tell the whole story. In June 1944, the CCKW faced its greatest challenge. This challenge didn't come from German tanks or bombers, but from the harsh realities of war. Simple physics, the tyranny of distance, and the complexities of supply. On June 6, 1944, Over 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on 5 beaches in Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. They achieved tactical surprise and established a foothold on Hitler's Atlantic Wall. But securing a beachhead wasn't victory. By mid-July, over 1 million Allied troops were crammed into a pocket just 50 miles wide and 20 miles deep, with little room to advance. The Germans had turned Normandy into a defensive nightmare. Ancient hedgerows and thick earth walls created thousands of small fields, each forming a separate battle. American infantry and armor struggled, gaining only yards instead of miles. Then came Operation Cobra. On July 25, 1944, American forces launched a massive breakout, supported by heavy bombing. Within days, the German lines began to crack, and American armored divisions poured through. By early August, General George Patton's Third Army was racing across the French countryside, covering 50 to 80 miles a day. This rapid advance threatened to trap and destroy entire German armies. But Patton's tankers soon faced a new danger: running out of fuel. Each Sherman tank consumed about 150 gallons of gasoline per 100 miles. With 250 tanks in an armored division, the fuel needs were staggering. In addition to tanks, trucks, jeeps, and other vehicles further strained fuel supplies. Patton's daily fuel requirements exceeded 400,000 gallons, and First Army needed a similar amount. British and Canadian forces had their own supply lines to manage. The total Allied fuel consumption in early August 1944 exceeded 3 million gallons per day. The Allies had planned for a rapid advance, but they hadn't anticipated such a swift breakthrough. Within 2 weeks of Operation Cobra, American spearheads were just 200 miles from the Normandy beaches. Within a month, they had advanced nearly 350 miles. Every gallon of fuel, every shell, every ration had to travel that distance over war. Damaged roads through a French transportation network that had been decimated by Allied bombings in the months leading up to D-Day. The railroads had been deliberately destroyed to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the invasion beaches. But now, the Allies found themselves unable to use those same railroads to supply their advancing armies. The artificial ports, or mulberry harbors, that had been towed across the English Channel were essential for the initial supply operations. However, a massive storm in mid-June had destroyed the American Mulberry Harbor. And although the British Mulberry Harbor at Arromanches remained operational, it couldn't handle the tonnage required for 2 entire army groups. The port at Cherbourg had been captured, but its facilities had been so thoroughly destroyed by the Germans that repairs would take months. By late August 1944, the situation was dire. Patton's tanks were running out of fuel, and First Army was rationing ammunition. Without immediate resupply, the Allied advance would grind to a halt, allowing the Germans time to regroup and establish new defensive lines. The opportunity to end the war in 1944 would be lost. On August 21, 1944, American logistics officers held an emergency planning meeting. After 36 hours of nonstop discussions, they came up with a bold solution. They would establish a dedicated express convoy system. Every available truck would be pressed into service, with 2 one-way routes running from Normandy to forward supply points. All civilian traffic would be banned. This was a desperate, audacious plan, but it was born out of the American experience with transcontinental highways and massive trucking networks. Military police were stationed at every intersection to ensure the convoys kept moving without interruption. The plan required more trucks than any single unit had on hand, so logistics officers scrambled to gather vehicles from every available source. Artillery battalions gave up their prime movers. Engineer units surrendered construction equipment haulers. Medical companies released ambulances, and infantry divisions lost their transportation. Every truck capable of moving was pressed into service, with the GMC CCKW being the primary vehicle. By August 1944, tens of thousands of these trucks had already been shipped to Europe. They were parked in motor pools, supply depots, and rear areas, awaiting their time. Now they were assembled for the largest truck convoy in history. Eventually, the number of trucks on the road would reach nearly 6,000 at once. But trucks need drivers, and American segregation created both a crisis and an opportunity. In 1944, the U.S. Army remained racially segregated, and African American soldiers served in separate units under mostly white officers. Military policy based on racist beliefs assumed that black soldiers were unfit for combat roles, so they were assigned to service units like the Quartermaster Corps, port battalions, and transportation units, primarily as truck drivers. In August 1944, approximately 210,000 African-American soldiers served in the European theater, with around 93,000 of them in the Quartermaster Corps. When the call for truck drivers went out, these men stepped up, not because they wanted to drive trucks for 60 hours straight, or because they enjoyed being segregated and discriminated against while fighting for freedom abroad. They answered the call because their country needed them, because combat troops depended on them, and because they knew that serving with distinction could help advance the cause of civil rights back home. 17,000 African-American soldiers became Red Ball Express drivers, joined by 3,000 additional white soldiers. In practice, however, the operation remained largely segregated, with black and white units running separate convoys. The drivers ranged in age from 18 to 40, though most were under 24. Many had never driven a truck before joining the military. Some came from urban areas where owning a car was rare, while others were farm boys who had driven tractors, factory workers who knew assembly lines, or college students whose educations were interrupted by the draft. Many had experienced discrimination throughout their lives, yet they were now tasked with one of the most critical supply missions of the war. The Red Ball Express began operating on August 25, 1944. The name came from railroad terminology dating back to the late 1800s. Railroad companies used red balls to mark priority freight cars, signaling all other traffic to yield. In France, red balls appeared on signs marking dedicated truck routes and were painted on the hoods of trucks involved in the operation. The system itself was simple but effective. Two parallel one-way routes connected the ports of Normandy to forward supply depots. The northern route carried loaded trucks toward the front, while the southern route returned empty trucks to Normandy, often carrying German prisoners as cargo. Over time, the total route length would stretch to nearly 400 miles as the front moved eastward. Convoys were supposed to consist of at least 5 trucks, with jeep escorts at the front and rear. Trucks were instructed to maintain a 60-yard interval and a 25 mph maximum speed. However, in practice, trucks often left as soon as they were loaded, without waiting for the rest of the convoy. Speed limits became mere suggestions, and drivers sometimes removed or disabled engine governors to push the CCKWs beyond their 56 mph design limit. Some veterans reported speeds exceeding 60 mph, which was terrifying in a 2.5-ton truck with 1940s suspension and brakes. The 793rd Military Police Battalion was tasked with maintaining route security and controlling traffic. MPs manned major intersections to ensure the convoys kept moving, and they did their best to stop speed violations. Some MPs even rode with the convoys when their jeeps couldn't keep up with the speeding trucks. Each round trip took about 54 hours as the front moved east. 2-man driver teams shared duties, but both often stayed awake for the entire journey. The trucks carried everything: gasoline in 5-gallon jerry cans, ammunition in wooden crates, food rations, medical supplies, spare parts, mail from home, and sometimes black market items. Loading operations at Normandy ports ran 24 hours a day, with stevedores, many of whom were also African American, working efficiently to load 5 tons of cargo into a CCKW in under 10 minutes. Drivers signed for their loads, received their route instructions, and set off toward the front. No rest stops, no delays. The journey itself was grueling. Drivers navigated in blackout conditions, using tiny cat-eye lights that barely illuminated the road. They had to rely on memory, following the truck ahead of them by instinct. The roads were often cratered from bombing and shelling, with bridges damaged and detours unmarked. Getting lost meant wasting fuel and valuable time. German air raids, though less frequent by late summer 1944, still posed a threat. A convoy of trucks was a tempting target. Drivers learned to watch the skies, listen for the sound of German engines, and scatter off the roads when air raid warnings went off. Some trucks mounted 50 caliber machine guns for reassurance, though these were more for show than actual defense. Landmines were a constant danger, as German forces planted mines along road shoulders and in likely parking areas. Some mines were sophisticated, triggered by motion or pressure. Some of the landmines were crude, Buried shells or captured munitions rigged to detonate under the weight of a vehicle. Red ball drivers learned to stay on the pavement, park only in cleared areas, and watch for disturbed earth or suspicious objects. But the greatest enemy they faced was fatigue. The men pushed themselves beyond their limits, relying on coffee and sheer determination to keep going. Some drivers took Benzedrine, amphetamines issued by medical officers to combat exhaustion, although this practice was discouraged. While the drugs kept them awake, they also impaired judgment, leading to accidents. Many drivers chose to stay awake using coffee, cigarettes, and willpower alone. Accidents became common as trucks collided, overturned, or crashed into obstacles. Drivers sometimes fell asleep at the wheel despite their best efforts. Vehicles ran off the road in darkness. Some accidents were fatal. Relief drivers were assigned to ride along, taking over when the primary drivers could no longer continue safely. Even with this, exhaustion took its toll. The trucks, though designed for military use, couldn't handle continuous operation without proper maintenance. Engines overheated in the summer heat while hauling maximum loads at high speeds. Transmissions failed, clutches burned out, and brakes wore through in days instead of months. Tires failed frequently from overloading in high-speed travel on rough roads. Maintenance was done under extreme conditions. Mechanics worked beside the road, in fields, or under tarps strung between trucks. They had basic tools and whatever spare parts they could scrounge. Many repairs were makeshift, enough to get the truck back on the road but not proper fixes. Oil changes were skipped, and scheduled maintenance was ignored. Everything was sacrificed to keep the trucks rolling. Mechanics became experts in improvisation, fashioning gaskets from whatever materials they could find, bypassing broken components with makeshift solutions, and cannibalizing parts from one truck to repair another. The simple design of the CCKW made this possible. A mechanic with basic skills could figure out the problem, find the needed parts, and perform repairs with available materials. This adaptability, born from necessity, turned out to be one of the truck's greatest strengths. By late August, broken-down trucks were scattered along the red ball routes. Some estimates suggest that over 80 trucks were abandoned when they couldn't be quickly repaired. Drivers took what parts they could carry and hitched rides with passing convoys. Wrecker trucks worked nonstop to recover disabled vehicles, but even they broke down under the strain. At one point, nearly 30% of red ball trucks had significant mechanical problems that should have taken them out of service. But they kept going, because the alternative was unthinkable. Despite all these challenges, the operation succeeded beyond expectations. By August 29, 1944, 30 truck companies operating 5,958 vehicles delivered 12,342 tons of supplies to forward depots. This single-day performance exceeded every pre-war estimate of what was logistically possible. The numbers kept rising. Daily deliveries averaged between 10,000 and 12,500 tons, with 900 trucks on the road at any given time. Over the course of 82 days, the Red Ball Express drivers hauled 4,193 tons of supplies across France. They covered 121 million ton miles, a measure of the tonnage multiplied by the distance traveled. They kept multiple army groups supplied during the most rapid advance in military history. Private James Rookard of the 514th Quartermaster Regiment later recalled the experience. "We hauled anything General Patton needed. Gasoline, ammunition, food, medical supplies. We took it all the way to the front lines, back and forth. Some drivers ran into ambushes. My company was lucky, but there was shooting all around us. We had to watch for V1 buzz bombs. My worst memories were seeing trucks get blown up and being afraid I might get killed. But when General Patton said, 'Be there,' you were there, even if you had to drive all day and night." Rookard's testimony captured the essence of the Red Ball Express: the constant fear, the exhaustion, the pride in knowing their work mattered, and the determination to keep going no matter what. His company made the run from Cherbourg to the forward depots dozens of times during the operation's 82 days. They lost trucks to accidents, mechanical failures, and occasional enemy fire, but they never failed to deliver. Corporal Washington Rector of the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company described the racial dynamics of the operation. "You accepted discrimination. We were warned not to fraternize with whites for fear problems would arise. Some white drivers would try to prevent black drivers from passing their convoys, creating dangerous road conditions, but most white combat troops appreciated us. They knew we were risking our lives to get them what they needed. Rector's account highlighted the complex racial tensions within the Red Ball Express. Black and white units often operated separately, and when they did interact, discrimination showed up in small but significant ways. White MPs might stop black drivers more frequently. White mess facilities might serve black drivers last, and white drivers might refuse to help black drivers with mechanical problems. However, when German shells fell or a truck broke down far from help, race mattered less than survival. Black and white drivers sometimes helped each other despite official segregation. The trucks themselves became legends among the drivers. The CCKWs could take incredible punishment. Overload them, speed them, skip maintenance, and they still kept running. Sure, they broke down frequently, with weak transmissions and worn-out brakes, but they could be fixed with basic tools. A complex truck that needed a factory to repair would have been useless. The simplicity of the CCKW was its strength. The drivers developed an intimate knowledge of their trucks, learning the sounds of every component and recognizing when something was about to fail. They knew how far they could push the trucks before risking catastrophic breakdowns. This deep understanding came from spending days and nights behind the wheel, performing their own repairs and pushing the vehicles beyond their limits. By September 1944, the Red Ball Express was delivering supplies to depots 350 miles from Normandy. The logistics became more complicated as the distances grew longer, resulting in lower daily tonnage per truck. More trucks broke down from extended use, and driver fatigue became a critical issue. The French railroad system, which engineers worked frantically to repair, remained mostly inoperative. New ports, particularly Antwerp in Belgium, were still in German hands or too damaged to use. The strain on the operation was visible. Accident rates climbed, and some convoys were ambushed by German forces that had been bypassed, but were still fighting in isolated pockets. Theft became a problem as valuable cargo disappeared from trucks parked at rest stops. Gasoline, cigarettes, and food rations were sold on the black market in liberated French cities like Paris. Drivers and cargo handlers were often accused of stealing, contributing to racial tensions. Military police investigated numerous incidents, but rarely recovered stolen goods. Yet, the trucks kept rolling because the alternative was unthinkable. General Patton's Third Army, the spearhead of the Allied advance, consumed supplies faster than any military formation in history. His tankers were engaged in almost continuous combat, expending ammunition at a rate that shocked supply officers. Each tank engagement could burn through an entire combat load, requiring immediate resupply. Patton's aggressive tactics destroyed German divisions and captured territory, but none of it would have been possible without the Red Ball Express. Patton himself recognized the operation's significance. Though famous for his bold, armored tactics, he knew that logistics made everything possible. His tanks were useless without fuel, artillery silent without shells, and infantry ineffective without food and ammunition. The Red Ball Express made his rapid advance possible. Without it, Patton's army would have stalled within weeks of the breakout, allowing the Germans to establish new defensive lines that could have prolonged the war for months or even years. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, also recognized the importance of the Red Ball Express. In an October message to the personnel, he wrote, "To you drivers, mechanics, and your officers who keep the Red Ball vehicles constantly moving, I wish to express my deep appreciation. You are doing an excellent job." Eisenhower, with his experience planning Operation Torch in North Africa, understood better than most that supply determined what military operations were possible. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome logistical failure. The Red Ball Express, with its simple yet essential system of trucks, drivers, and roads, represented the heart of logistics. It wasn't sophisticated or glamorous, but it was absolutely vital. Eisenhower's public recognition of the drivers' contributions was unusual for the time, but it reflected his genuine appreciation for the critical, behind-the-scenes work. The contrast with German logistics was striking. Despite its reputation as a modern mechanized force, The German Wehrmacht relied heavily on horse-drawn transport. During World War II, Germany employed over 2.8 million horses to move supplies and equipment. Their truck production was limited by steel shortages, fuel constraints, and the focus on weapons manufacturing. When German mechanized units advanced, they often outran their own logistics, contributing to defeats in places like Russia and North Africa. In France in 1944, German forces faced a logistical nightmare. Allied air superiority made daylight movement almost impossible, while the French resistance sabotaged rail lines and ambushed convoys. The Wehrmacht's horse-drawn supply system, which worked for defensive operations, couldn't support the mobility required by modern warfare. German units frequently fought with shortages of ammunition, food, and fuel. Captured German soldiers even admitted that American logistical superiority was as demoralizing as American firepower. By mid-November 1944, the situation had changed enough for the Red Ball Express to stand down. The port facilities in Antwerp had been cleared of German demolitions and were reopened to Allied shipping. The shorter supply line from Antwerp to the front drastically reduced trucking distances. French railroads, repaired by American and British engineers, began operating again, and portable gasoline pipelines were laid across France to deliver fuel directly to forward depots. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express officially ended after 82 days of continuous operation. The drivers, many of them more exhausted than they had ever been, returned to their original units. Some continued working in other supply operations, while others volunteered for combat roles as the Army, desperate for infantry replacements, began accepting African American soldiers for frontline service. The final statistics told an impressive story: 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, with 6,000 trucks at peak operation and 23,000 drivers and support personnel. 75% of the drivers were African American. At any given time, 900 vehicles were on the road, covering distances of up to 400 miles one way, for 82 days without pause. But the real story was the truck itself. The GMC CCKW, initially dismissed by British experts as inadequate, proved to be the most valuable tactical vehicle of World War II. Its simplicity, which had made it seem inferior, was its greatest strength. Drivers could repair CCKWs with basic tools, and mechanics could keep them running with improvised parts. The trucks could be abused, overloaded, and neglected, yet they continued to function. The CCKW's reliability under strain became legendary. There were stories of trucks running with cracked engine blocks, held together by wire and sheer determination, of transmissions that should have failed continuing to shift gears, and of trucks that rolled into depots with flat tires, overheated engines, and failing brakes, only to receive quick repairs and head back out again. General Patton himself stated, "The 2-in-1 2-ton truck is our most valuable weapon." He understood what many civilians didn't: without supply, armies become mobs. Tanks without fuel are useless. Rifles without ammunition are clubs, and the most advanced weapons are ineffective if they can't be sustained. The humble CCKW truck made modern mechanized warfare possible by solving the critical problem of moving supplies. Colonel John Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander's son and a logistics officer himself, wrote after the war that without the Red Ball truck drivers, the advance across France could not have been made. The CCKW trucks were essential in keeping American forces moving, preventing a pause that could have allowed German defenses to regroup. Without the success of this logistical effort, the war could have extended into 1946. In December 1944, the concept of the Red Ball Express was tested again. German forces launched Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge. This surprise offensive created a dangerous bulge in the Allied lines, requiring rapid reinforcement and resupply. Although the Red Ball Express had officially ended, the trucks and drivers weren't done. Reformed under new names like the Little Red Ball, the White Ball Express, and others, convoy operations resumed. The same CCKWs that had supported Patton's advance now rushed reinforcements to contain the German breakthrough. The same African-American drivers returned to the roads, this time in winter conditions that made the summer's challenges seem minor. Snow and ice-covered roads, and German air attacks increased as the Luftwaffe threw its reserves into the offensive. Despite these challenges, the trucks kept rolling. Ammunition reached besieged American units, Fuel kept tanks and trucks moving, and reinforcements arrived to seal the German breach. While the Battle of the Bulge was won through intense combat, it was sustained by the truck drivers, who kept the supply lines open in the harshest winter conditions Europe had seen in decades. Winter operations presented new obstacles. Engines froze overnight, ice made roads treacherous, snowdrifts blocked paths, and frostbite became a constant threat for drivers in open, cab trucks with little heat. But the convoys kept moving, proving that the logistics system developed during the Red Ball Express could adapt to any conditions. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, the CCKW continued to serve. The trucks that had crossed France in 1944 were now in Germany. They transported displaced persons to refugee camps, distributed food to starving civilians, and carried occupation troops across the defeated Reich. Some were even sent to the Pacific, where they served in the Philippines and Okinawa campaigns. Production continued until 1945. By the end of the war, General Motors had produced more CCKW trucks than Germany had made vehicles of all types combined. The total production, around 750 units, surpassed the pre-war truck inventory of most nations. These trucks didn't just serve the U.S., they were supplied to Allied forces worldwide through lease agreements. British, French, Soviet, and Canadian armies all operated GMC CCKWs. The simplicity of the CCKW truck translated to remarkable longevity. They remained in active U.S. military service into the 1960s. Although the M35 series trucks replaced the CCKW in the 1950s, older CCKWs continued to be used in National Guard and Reserve units for years after. Many were sold as surplus to foreign militaries, where they served into the 1970s and 1980s. Some are still operational today, in the hands of collectors and museums. The recognition of the Red Ball Express drivers, especially the African-American majority, came slowly and incompletely. During the war, the operation was publicized through newsreels and magazine articles, but the racial dimension was often downplayed or ignored, particularly in media targeted at segregated American audiences. The 1952 film Red Ball Express, while acknowledging African-American involvement, was modified by the Department of Defense to depict racial integration that didn't exist in 1944. Many Red Ball veterans returned to a segregated America, facing discrimination in housing, employment, and civil rights. Some used GI Bill benefits for education and home loans, though these benefits were often difficult for African Americans to access. Banks denied loans, universities imposed quotas, and employers often passed over qualified black veterans in favor of white applicants. For some, their military service was dismissed or forgotten. Yet, the story endured. In the 1980s and 90s, historians began to document the full scope of the Red Ball Express operations. Veterans' testimonies were recorded, and museums created exhibits to preserve the history of the convoy system and the soldiers who made it possible. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans, for instance, showcases extensive materials about the Red Ball Express, including restored GMC CCKWs and personal accounts from the drivers. James Rocard, a veteran from the 514th Quartermaster Regiment, later reflected, "I'm proud I served. We were young, we were scared, but we did what needed doing. A lot of white folks didn't think black soldiers could handle responsibility. We proved them wrong. Every supply run that reached the front line on time, that was us proving we deserved respect. That was us fighting for freedom, foreign and domestic." Rocard's words capture the double consciousness of African-American World War II veterans. They fought for victory abroad while knowing that they were denied full citizenship at home. They risked their lives for a country that segregated and discriminated against them. Yet their distinguished service advanced the broader struggle for civil rights. The technical lessons learned from the Red Ball Express operations shaped American military logistics for decades. The concept of continuous supply convoys, dedicated routes with priority traffic control, and massive trucking operations became standard practice. During the Korean War, similar convoy systems were used to supply United Nations forces, and the same approach was applied in Vietnam. Despite differences in terrain and tactics, truck convoys remained crucial to American military operations. Modern military logistics still studies the planning and execution of the Red Ball Express. The GMC CCKW design also influenced post-war truck development globally. Its 6F6 configuration became standard for military medium tactical trucks, and the idea of using mass-produced, easily maintained vehicles instead of specialized military designs became accepted worldwide. Soviet designers, who received thousands of CCKWs through Lend-Lease, carefully studied the trucks. Post-war Soviet military trucks, such as the WWII series, showed clear CCKW influence in both layout and capability. The Soviets understood that the CCKW's greatest feature wasn't any specific technical specification, but the entire package of reliable performance, simple maintenance, and mass availability. Modern military vehicles are far more sophisticated than the CCKW, with computers, automatic transmissions, and armor protection. However, they still face the same fundamental challenge: how to move supplies reliably under combat conditions while remaining simple enough for field maintenance. Every military truck designer since 1945 has worked in the shadow of the CCKW, striving to match its combination of capability and simplicity. The CCKW proved that excellence in military equipment isn't always about having the best specifications. The British were correct that the ACKWX, the predecessor to the CCKW, was underpowered and had handling issues. But they were wrong about what mattered in total war. It's not about superior vehicles produced in small numbers, but about adequate vehicles produced in overwhelming quantities. Trucks that can be repaired with basic tools outperform those that require specialized equipment and factory support. The CCKW's simplicity made it ideal for the chaos of combat logistics. It could endure neglect and abuse, which made it perfect for long-haul missions in difficult conditions. The British, who had initially rejected the ACKWX, eventually came to appreciate the CCKW's capabilities. The long wheelbase that seemed unwieldy on narrow European roads provided stability for heavy loads. The engine that seemed underpowered proved to be reliable and strong enough for the job. British mechanics, trained on more complex vehicles, learned to maintain the CCKW with whatever tools and parts were available. One British transport officer even wrote that the American trucks, initially considered crude, proved superior to British vehicles in sustained operations. The story of the GMC CCKW and the Red Ball Express is ultimately a story about what wins wars. Not the most advanced technology or the best specifications, but reliable equipment produced in large quantities, operated by people who are determined to get the job done. The CCKW wasn't the best truck of World War II, but it was adequate, and in large numbers, it became the backbone of the most successful military campaign in history. Dismissed by the British in 1940 as worthless, the CCKW became America's secret weapon, keeping the Allied armies moving from Normandy to the Elbe River. The drivers, 75% of them African, American soldiers fighting for a country that still denied them basic civil rights, proved that excellence transcends race. They kept the trucks rolling when every pause could mean American soldiers running out of ammunition or fuel. They drove through exhaustion, fear, and discrimination because the mission was more important than personal comfort or recognition. When the war ended, these men returned to a nation that had not fully recognized their contributions. Many faced the same discrimination they had before the war. But they had proven something essential. They had shown that American soldiers could handle complex, critical missions under the toughest conditions. They had proven that segregation was a lie, and that ability and determination had nothing to do with skin color. The Red Ball Express became part of the evidence that would help dismantle Jim Crow segregation in the years to come. On August 25, 1944, Sergeant William Henderson finished tightening the last bolt on a CCKW engine and watched as the truck rolled out to join the convoy. The British had called these trucks worthless. Henderson knew better. He understood that, in the next 82 days, these so-called inadequate vehicles would become a pivotal part of history. Not through dramatic combat action, but through simple, stubborn, unglamorous work. The CCKW truck became the lifeline of the Red Ball Express and proof that sometimes the simplest things, operated by determined people, are the most valuable.